Aajonus Wonderplanets was not just another nutritionist. He came from a depth of illness I can essentially guarantee that you've never heard of anyone recovering from, to achieving a level of health far beyond what most people have ever seen. He had blood, bone, stomach, and lymphatic cancer, autism, angina pectoris, and more. The treatment for the cancer cauterized his spine, leaving him borderline paralyzed. He was getting blood transfusions twice a week, as he would bleed profusely every time he ate, since his teeth dangled in his gums. He deteriorated to the brink of death, not even having the strength to lift his body to use a bedpan to piss in. So he was constantly shitting and throwing up all over his entire apartment, and then he would take a few hours to crawl just a few feet to a clean spot while in excruciating pain. Hospice workers came twice a week to clean his place and make his food, which was donuts blended with soda that he drank through a straw because he couldn't chew anything. After a little bit of time, one of them offered raw milk and raw carrot juice. That saved him from the brink of death. And about 11 days later, his autism mysteriously turned off and he was able to understand communication. Once that happened, he began reading, teaching himself how to read, and he had to look up the definition of every word in every definition. And eventually he got to the nutrition books. And after years of constant experimentation, he had a good nutritionist that helped him. He had the raw dairy and stuff, but it wasn't perfect. But he gradually rebuilt his health to the point where he could begin to function. He became frustrated that all the information contradicted everything else, and he finally stopped trusting all information and decided that he would not find the answer he needed from society. He ended up traveling the country, living on his bicycle in the wilderness for years, in order to try to observe the truth of health directly from nature. There were multiple instances where he lived with Native American tribes, occasionally rebuilding himself with raw milk again. One Inuit tribe was doing a traditional celebration of eating rotten meat while he was there. They dug up meat that was buried in the ground, wrapped in animal hide, and they checked to see how ripe it was. Because it didn't stink a half-mile downwind, they reburied it. Aajonus didn't believe it was actually meat. He thought they wouldn't tell him the secret, but he still wanted to see them eat it because he almost vomited just smelling it. When he observed them eating it sometime later, when it was ripe enough, the kids were jumping around excited like it was cotton candy. He was amazed by how much of it everybody ate. They ate multiple pounds over the course of a few days, and he could clearly see it made everybody very happy. He couldn't get close to it without almost vomiting, but the natives knew to put cotton balls with musk oil on them in his nose, and that would allow him to eat it. When he ate it, he described it as melting in his mouth like chocolate. After he ate it, he felt so invigorated and so full of life. He begged them to tell them the recipe, and they told him it was the rotten meat, but he still didn't believe them. And he became hopeless and ended up believing. Throughout his travels, he became a fruitarian, living off of only fruit. He was so lost and confused and didn't know what to do. His cancer started coming back, and so did the pain. He lost the will to live and did not want to fight anymore, so he decided to fast himself to death in an old Native American burial ground. A few weeks after a series of strange encounters with the coyotes, where they would seem to play games with him at night, howling and seeming like crazy people screaming in the night, a wild coyote brought him a big, ripped-open jackrabbit. After remembering his uncle telling him that he would die within 48 hours if he ate an undercooked rabbit, he ate it thinking that he could die more quickly by eating raw meat instead of suffering over a long period. For those who are skeptical of that, consider, we all know cats and dogs proudly bring rodents into our homes and bring it to our feet. For the first time in his life, aside from the high meat from the natives, he felt truly good, full of strength and energized and truly alive. The only other time he had felt anything close to this was during his near-death experiences where you die, consciously leaving your body, and come back to life. This moment changed everything. It was his return to life and the beginning of the Primal diet. The next day he woke up not dead, and after a few days he realized he found the answer he was always looking for. Raw meat, and the natives weren't lying. He reincorporated raw milk and raw eggs and began recovering faster than ever before. At first he only ate raw meat twice a week. It took 6 years of experimentation before he realized how important it was to eat it twice daily. He did lots of experimenting, and over time he fine-tuned the diet further and further. Despite his miraculous health advances after eating raw meat, he was still afraid of the parasites. At one point, he accidentally ate raw salmon infested with pinworms from a dumpster at nighttime when he was breaking along fast. The seafood place was closed, and in desperation, he found a piece of fish in the dumpster. Only after eating it did he realize it was filled with worms, but experienced no illness. He had his urine and feces checked for 6 weeks and found no trace of parasites. This was 13 years after discovering the raw meat. He spent 13 years in fear. Eventually, he went to all the universities where research on raw meat producing parasites would have been conducted and found that there was no real evidence. Most, if not all, evidence was based on surveys, theoretical risk, and not actual clinical cases. No experiments to prove anything. Aajonus had his vagus nerve cut from his stomach during a treatment which put him in the pharmaceutical industry's category of high risk for parasitic and bacterial infections. Without the vagus nerve, he could not secrete hydrochloric acid, which is what would theoretically kill parasites in raw meat. If raw meat were the problem, he would have been the first to have an issue, because he had no, quote, defense mechanism. Aajonus explains that most of the so-called research against raw meat was based on surveys, not real evidence. This allows authorities to rely on phrases like linked to, associated with, and may increase the risk of, without ever actually proving anything. Studies are easily manipulated, especially when billions of dollars depend on, or even trillions of dollars, depend on preserving modern health beliefs. Another method used to falsely prove that bacteria is dangerous is placing human cells in a petri dish, adding bacteria and observing the bacteria dissolve, the dead cells. These cells are already outside of the human body, meaning they're in a completely unnatural environment and hence they're already ready to be broken down. When something's out of the body, it's already considered dead. Aajonus explains that bacteria breaking down dead cells is part of their job. They're not attacking something healthy and living. Aajonus points to the work of Dr. John Ioannidis, a medical researcher who exposed the corruption within modern science. He found that up to 90% of published medical information is false or misleading, and even top-tier studies were often biased, flawed, and never retested. His team discovered that some of the most cited studies have already been disproven and are still continued to be referenced. Science is often untrue. It's driven by corporate funding for profit, career, political pressure, and pharmaceutical influence. I found it appropriate to share the contents of Chapter 8 from Aajonus' book, The Recipe for Living Without Disease, here. What's healthiest to eat and what's not? In an ideal world, a recipe for health satisfies a person's well-being and desire for good taste. In the natural world without pollution, animals are guided by instinct to eat raw food rich in nutrients and bacteria. They are guided by their senses. If we were healthy animals that allowed pure natural instinct to direct our senses of hunger, we would eat what is best for our bodily functions. Unfortunately, in our industrial, food, carbohydrate-addicted, bacterial-phobic society, we eat from the muddled combination of instinct, habituation, and addiction. I have observed and counseled many people who ate a raw, instinctive diet. I tried and enjoyed a raw, instinctive diet for 6 years. We ate only foods that appealed to our senses of smell, taste, and fullness. We ate a lot of fruit because sweetness appealed to all of us. Even though we felt better in general, too often we suffered severe symptoms: over-emotionality, hyperactivity, and irritability. Those experiences were no different than our experiences on the standard American diet. We assumed that instinctive eating was a better diet because it was natural. When my teeth began to rapidly decay, I began to doubt the power of food. Someone suggested that I eat a modified raw diet that restricted high carbohydrate food, including carrot and sweet fruit juices and sweet fruit. I was appalled at the suggestion because I loved sweet fruit. Since I wanted to stop my tooth decay, I tried eating a raw diet of meat, dairy, eggs, green juice, and only a half cup of fruit daily. The diet was not as enjoyable and I was often nauseated for the first 3 weeks, but my life gradually improved. My tremendous anxiety over the polluted, greed-driven, and fearful structure society and government settled. I spent more time finding or creating solutions and less time brooding and being ineffective. I became less sensitive to cold temperatures and less hyperactive. My overenthusiasm and zealousness mellowed. I was better able to communicate, write, and read. When I ate too much fruit, I relapsed into heightened anxiety. After a year of eating that way, I advised changes to my clients' diets. Some clients gradually experienced the same improvements that I had. Most of them experienced immediate improvements. It was a wonderful leap of progress towards a healthier, happier, disease-free life. I experimented with fine-tuning the diet. I continually found that raw fats, especially raw unsalted butter, are the primary substances that dissolve and bind with toxicity, protect ourselves, reverse the greatest number and most severe cases of diseases, and deliver the greatest strength and energy. In an ideal, healthy world, we would not need such an abundance of fat. In our civilized, polluted, disease-ridden world, we need an abundance of fat. Before my move away from high-carbohydrate food, I discovered that most people do not regenerate cells to reverse or prevent the aging process of deterioration and disease without eating plenty of raw meat in combination with raw fats. My experience contradicted the conditioned thinking that meats and fats are bad and cause obesity and a myriad of other diseases. After my shift away from eating high-carbohydrate food, I discovered that I healed more quickly. My clients who implemented the changes of diet also healed more quickly. It was not long after my introduction to raw food that I became aware that our bodies have innumerable chores to complete every minute. They eat, digest, transport, utilize, and assimilate foods to energize, lubricate membranes, regenerate and reproduce to replace dead cells. Dead cells must be collected, transported, dissolved, or disassembled, sorted through usable substances, and the byproducts discarded. The innumerable enzymes and vitamins found in raw food are the helpers necessary to accomplish those tasks. When we eat raw food, we have trillions of helpers to accomplish all those tasks with little waste. When we cook and or process food, we massacre our helpers, causing our bodies to have to do all the chores on their own. Cooking and processing exhaust our body's natural resources. We further exhaust our natural resources trying to clean up the toxicity after the massacre. The pancreas must produce and discharge extra hormones and electromagnetic signals that leach quality vitamins, enzymes, minerals, fats, proteins, and carbohydrates from every cell to clean up the massacre, as well as continue to perform all of its ordinary, innumerable bodily tasks. In most people, many years of leaching causes gradual and marked decrease in strength and agility. That is common in our society. Leaching reduces the ability of each and every cell to withstand the increased toxicity that accompanies this process and produces diseases of all kinds. A simple analogy is this. We are the mayors of a city, the body, in which we live. We must renovate, maintain, and keep the city efficient and clean. Our enzymes are the maids, gardeners, food preparers, handy and craftspersons, helpers, and managers that accomplish all the chores necessary every second. We massacre the workers, cook and or process our food, destroying enzymes and vitamins. Not only do we have to clean the massacre, we must seize workers from other tasks to do all the chores of the city. That depletes our resources and depresses the population, ourselves. That entire process is impossible to maintain. We cannot properly accomplish the chores. Pollution collects and creates a toxic environment within the city, and the city deteriorates. Taking the analogy another step, let's say we rebuilt New York City, our body, from poor and poisonous materials, cooked and processed foods. The city dwellers, animals and plants, our cells and microbes, are variously affected. They overproduce waste because they are weak and lack the resources necessary to maintain a self-sustainable environment. Grime accumulates in the homes, buildings, streets, fields, parks, and skies, deteriorating structures and life. Now let's say we become aware that we built a polluted and rapidly deteriorating, diseased city. How much time will it take to reorganize, demolish faulty structures, load, transport, and bury waste, neutralize poisonous matter, search for and gather nutrients, negotiate, redesign, renovate, and restructure? How long will roads be blocked and overcongested? What degree of inconvenience, pollution, and pain will residents and workers suffer? If people had to completely rebuild New York City, how long would it take? 250 years? 500? Our bodies do not normally sustain a complete, instant, cataclysmic breakdown of organs, glands, or systems as New York City did when the Twin Towers collapsed. The body has to take itself apart bit by bit. Bacteria, molds, and parasites help speed the process by consuming the weak or dead cells and degenerative tissue, reducing them to lesser wastes. Viruses are not alive. They are solvents, soaps that dissolve, produced within cells to dissolve toxicity, including degenerative cells. It is cellular self-surgery. The detoxification process is slow, accompanied by many uncomfortable symptoms. The work of doctors Pottinger and Howell corroborates the results of my observations of more than 5,000 people who eat a mainly raw diet. Our conclusion is that animals require 5 generations to reach optimal health. Since bones in humans take approximately 7.5 years to be completely replaced one time, our bodies require approximately 40 years to rebuild themselves to reach optimal health. Fortunately, we do not have to wait for a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow to feel better. We improve every year on a health-giving diet. What separates Aajonus from everybody else in the world is his use of iridology. Iridology is the analysis of the iris to observe the locations of stored toxicity and cellular health in the body. Iridology is undeniable, immediate, and repeatable. If you see changes in the iris over long periods of time, there is no denying anything, whereas other analyses involve educated guesses and conflicting opinions. Irises are stable and undergo gradual changes, reflecting both general and precise conditions everywhere in the body, not just the blood and urine, which fluctuates every few minutes. Blood, urine, and other chemical tests don't reflect the overall health of the body, only what's being processed at that moment. Blood work shows you what is circulating, not what is stored. If you don't know what is stored, then you don't have anything useful to work with. With blood work, you can have a nutrient deficiency in that moment only because you went a few hours without eating, because your body is detoxing something that was using your nutrients, or maybe because you inhaled a big whiff of someone's perfume a few minutes before you took the test. You don't need to know what's in your blood to tell what deficiencies you have. With Aajonus' system, you can find what you need to know very easily without sacrificing your blood, spending a bunch of money, and wasting your time. Drawing blood wastes nutrients and destabilizes the system. Blood levels fluctuate constantly and are not reliable indicators of health. Blood work only reflects what is circulating, not what is stored, what's healing, or what's truly going on. Quote, I do not give credence to the analysis of blood content. They do not test for quality, only quantity. That's nonsense. End quote. Quote, live blood analysis, the most ridiculous thing. You smear your fluids on a glass plate, change the whole chemistry, oxidize it. It doesn't resemble what blood is. End quote. Quote, medical tests are like taking a photograph of your blood and pretending it represents the whole body. It doesn't. End quote. This is why the Primal diet stands apart. It isn't based on theories, trends, or faith. It's based on visible, repeatable physical evidence observed through iridology, experienced through detox and healing, and proven through real results. Most people rely on how they feel or what a lab test says in order to decide if something is working. Labs can lie and feelings can be deceptive, as you may feel better because you're stimulated or because you stopped a healthful detox, which temporarily cause symptoms, or not so temporarily if you aren't eating properly. Iridology gives you the unbiased truth. That's why the system works when nothing else does. Present-day iridology lacks many aspects that Aajonus discovered when comparing iris photos of people with similar conditions over the course of 24 years. Aajonus didn't even dare to write his first book until he had years of proof, dozens of years, to really know for a fact that everything he taught worked. Some people criticize Aajonus, saying he made significant changes to the second edition of his book, where he reduced the consumption of cooked starches and overall fruit consumption. But the foundation was still the same, and the results he produced in irises at the end of his life is far beyond what anyone has ever achieved. At that time, he began calling his diet the perfect diet, and I truly believe that he was correct when he made that statement. What he gave us provides more than enough knowledge to produce miraculous results and be thoroughly satisfied. The issue is that many people struggle with the discipline to do the diet properly, so instead they take shortcuts, blame Aajonus, and claim the diet didn't work, when in reality they never even did the diet, or all they do is try to make the diet better by experimenting and never even doing it how it's supposed to be done. To repeat, raw animal-based and primal are not the same thing. Activism and legacy. Aajonus was also a dedicated activist for food freedom. He founded the Right to Choose Healthy Food Trust, which used private membership associations to protect people's access to raw foods. Raw milk, often illegal for public sale, can be purchased through private clubs, since the government does not have power over those transactions. It's ironic that raw milk is inconvenient to access or outright illegal, even though cigarettes and alcohol, which are proven to be harmful, are easily accessible. He lobbied both state and federal politicians, presented undeniable evidence in court, and exposed fraudulent health officials. One case even legalized raw milk in California. In one of his most impactful legal cases, a young girl's accidental drowning was falsely linked to raw milk simply because E. coli was found in her stomach, and her family happened to drink raw milk. Aajonus exposed how this connection was made purely through surveys and not evidence, and the girl was actually the only one in the family who didn't drink the milk. This led to the firing of the head of the health department of Los Angeles, who acted unlawfully in their case banning raw milk. Aajonus Wunderplants received an honorary PhD in nutrition around 2005 from an entity called Richmond University, which was presented as an affiliate of the University of St. Andrews in Scotland. A man contacted him explaining that a former St. Andrews graduate had healed using his diet and submitted his name for the reward. Aajonus was initially skeptical but agreed to accept the degree with the understanding that it was for his original research, not academic achievement. He submitted his 2 books, was quizzed on them, and later received the honorary PhD certificate. It stated that it was awarded for, quote, having demonstrated ability by original research, magna cum laude, with great distinction in nutrition, end quote. However, he later discovered that the university's website had disappeared and began to question whether the school had been absorbed, gone defunct, or if he had been tricked. He suspected a smear campaign, noticing that this controversy surfaced at a time when he was actively helping expose corruption in food safety enforcement. Despite the uncertainty, Aajonus emphasized that he never used the degree for employment or academic clout. It was simply a symbolic recognition of his work. This was mentioned for the people who used this as a point to try to discredit him, that he never boasted about having it, and it didn't really change anything. One note on iridology. One concern in the Primal Diet community is that there are individuals pretending to be good at iridology when they only know the very basics and are even charging money for it now. My opinion is that nobody should be charging money for iridology without having observed at least a few hundred irises over the course of a few years, preferably 5 to 10 years, all with proper photographs every single year. Having looked at 20 irises over the course of 6 months is not enough to consider yourself an iridologist and charge for it. Many people will change their diets in unnecessary and unproductive ways at the recommendations of these pretending iridologists, when it would be better to just follow the standard routine as described by Aajonus. Testimonial stories. Here I'm going over some inspiring stories that will help motivate you to take the diet seriously. With these, you'll begin to see the potential of what the diet can really do. There are many more that can be found in Aajonus Q&A audios. Chronic fatigue to high-performing entrepreneur. Quote, so we got the book, went on the diet, and this guy, he's a retired multi-millionaire. But he retired because he couldn't work anymore. He was just a vegetable. All he could do was eat, sleep, and watch TV. So here at 62 years old, I got him to start doing the hot baths. I got a call from him 3 months later, and he said, I can do nothing after I get out of the bath the next day. All I feel like doing is eating, sleeping, and watching TV. Nothing's changed. I said, well, how are you doing the diet? He went over it, and he said, that's pretty good. Not exactly as I stipulated, but it's good. Shouldn't cause any problems. it will maybe make things progress a little slower. I said, how are you doing the baths? He said, I do them every day, sometimes 2 hours a day. What's the temperature? He said 110. I'm like, oh my God, it's supposed to be 101. And he says it's 110 in the book. So this was 2 years after the book was printed. You know, the retype was in 2007. So I looked at the book, and sure enough, it was misprinted 110. I'm like, oh, fuck, what did I do? You know, how many people did I mislead? But all the reports came back good, so I started investigating the temperature at which the skin was damaged, and it was 111. So I thought, oh, good mistake. So it worked. So I said, well, just stop doing the baths for about 3 weeks and see what happens. He probably melted a lot of stuff, and it's so hot for so long, your body just needs to recuperate from that much heat, that much time every day. He said, sometimes I even fall asleep in it, and I did too, but I've been on the diet for so long, so I wasn't worried. I slept sometimes 4 hours in the hot tub, 104, 105 degrees, no problems with me. So after the 3-week break, he had so much energy that he started an international stem cell company, and now he's 77 years old and works 14 to 16 hours a day. That's how much hot baths can help. End quote. In response to that quote, for those concerned with potential mistakes like he said there, if Aajonus made a mistake in his books or Q&As, of which I could name several, he repeats himself frequently in Q&As, and you'll over time know what he meant to say. For example, when he was giving a remedy for malaria, one time he said lemon juice on accident, but he was supposed to say lime. 1 hour later, he gave the same thing, he said lime. And just because I know the diet, I know what he meant to say. And so you read my book, you ask me questions, or someone else who studied Aajonus religiously, they'll be able to tell you what he meant to say, and they can put the pieces together. But if you're searching through the Q&As and take one quote out of context, you know, he misspoke. It doesn't mean he was wrong, it just means he spoke incorrectly. So, after studying him, you'll know what it's supposed to be. Man produced 7 years of detox progress iridologically in 1 with cheese trains. The only real problem I have with patients are patients who've been skinny a long time. I mean, bird thin all their lives. They didn't have any fat to store the poisons. The toxins went into the cells, so their cells are terribly contaminated. Those are my worst patients. They're always in pain, they're always suffering, and they're always in fatigue. When they reach that straw in their life that breaks the back of their health, it's sometimes 10 or 11 years before they're healed. It's difficult. Now I had one fellow that came to me 2 years ago. He was in that shape. He was calling me all the time, and as you know, these people call all the time. So he came to see me in Chicago, and he was gray. I mean gray, not pink in the skin, nothing. Gray like a raccoon, all dark gray like charcoal. This fellow came in the door, and I mean, you know, it's only been 2 years, and he was pink. He was still a little gray, but he didn't look like a raccoon anymore. He was smiling and happy, and this guy didn't smile any time I've ever seen him. On the phone with him, nothing happy about him at all. I saw him 7 months ago in Chicago. I was like, okay, so you're not from this planet, right? Because if you look at your intestines and the iris, it was all the way black, completely around. You could not see the difference between his intestines and any other spot in his eye. That's how much mercury and heavy metals he had in his intestines. He was one of those skinny individuals that absorbed all the poisons and couldn't throw them off because he had no fats to throw them into. So here he walks out, and I look at his eyes, and he cleaned up 90% of the metals. And he said, I'm just doing better, I'm better, I feel happy, I'm good, I have energy now. And he was big. He went from a 31-inch waist to a 42-inch waist at 6'2". He was strong. He had red skin, not gray anymore. It was like a miracle. I said, okay, I want you to take me through everything you've done. And he says, well, let me be honest, I've been eating 10 times more cheese than what you asked me to eat. And Aajonus said, I gave you a minimum. I don't care if you eat 10 pounds a day. I just want you to eat a minimum of, you know, what I said. And so he couldn't stop eating the cheese, and basically it expedited the progress incredibly. So it increased the progress, basically 7 years in 1. Heavy metal poison lady heals with oysters. Quote, the way I first discovered it was every time I would eat a lot of oysters in Asia, I noticed the metals in my irises would decrease remarkably every time I went through a period of eating lots of oysters. I had one woman who was born and raised in the heart of London around all the airports dumping all their chemicals over her. She looked like a lathe operator. She had so much metal in her system. She was in chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, and was emotionally distraught, imbalanced, and couldn't stay on the diet. Nothing would satisfy her. So after about 2 years of all this mess, I said, you need to do something radical. You need to eat 3 oysters with every meat meal twice a day with a half cup of meat, and take 1 day off a week of the oysters. You know, he wanted her to do the high meat, but he said it wasn't her problem. It was actually the heavy metals. And when she came back, for what usually takes 3 to 5 years, she removed in 1 year, and it changed her entire life. She became happy, and she was solid, and she could have relationships now, and she wasn't so moody anymore. Next quote. Depressed man gets 3 girlfriends from high meat. I have one fellow who was chemically sensitive and hated people. So antisocial, he was homicidal, and he was on medication. He became a landscape artist so he didn't have to deal with people. He was on and off the diet for a year and a half. Of course, when you're having these psychological problems, even if you're eating good food, it's not feeding the brain and nervous system because our intestines are too toxic. So he's on and off the diet. So I finally convinced him to eat the high meat. It changed his life. He now eats 1 to 2 pounds a day. He wouldn't eat any fresh meat anymore. He's a bear of a guy. He's now the most funny, congenial person I've ever met, and this is a person who hated people. The last time I went there to do a workshop and seminar, he had 3 10 out of 10 girlfriends. How did he get one girlfriend into a situation where she's a girlfriend? Both of them are girlfriends in the same room, and he has 3 of them all supporting him because he's so funny and so charming and such a great guy. That's what he does. He eats only high meat for his meat consumption. Maybe in 10 or 15 years after he detoxes his intestines, he won't have to do it anymore because his brain will finally get nutrients. And this was before the cheese train discovery, so it could have happened in 2 or 3 instead of 10 to 15 because he didn't figure out that trick yet. Some people only need a ping pong ball-sized piece of meat once a week, and that takes care of it. Other people need to eat a lot. Aajonus' description of good versus bad health. I remember wanting to die. It was midsummer on Jekyll Island, Georgia. My girlfriend Awans and I were walking to the beach a block away. I spotted a patch of beautiful white mushrooms in a neighbor's yard. I had identified and eaten mushrooms in the island's woods from the time I had arrived 6 months earlier. Because these mushrooms resembled the poisonous Amanita, I cleared the ground at the base of one of them. I searched it for a cup-like lip at the similar-looking Amanita forms. I didn't find one, so Awans and I shared a tasty mushroom the size of my fist. I ate 2/3 and she ate 1/3. I remember she had breakfast and I hadn't. 2 hours later, 3 miles up the beach, Awans started vomiting again and again. She had terminal cancer. Becoming weak and vomiting was common for her back then. All the mushrooms and part of her breakfast seeped into the sand and washed into the ocean. We walked a short distance to the road, hoping to see someone we knew to give us a ride home. Then I began feeling shaky, dizzy, and exhausted. I realized we ate a poisonous mushroom. I wondered why I hadn't felt nauseous. Why hadn't my body rejected it as Awanza's had? Of course, the vagus nerve to my stomach had been severed in the surgery for my stomach cancer. My body's ability to defend itself from such a mistake had been damaged. I felt an ominous sensation, like I was about to enter the twilight zone. I waved my arms to stop a car, and the couple took us back home. At home, I began to vomit. Nothing spilled but saliva and hot acidic gases that burned my throat, sinuses, and nostrils. Within another half hour, muscles in my feet and legs began to cramp. I fell to the bathroom floor. The cramps traveled to my head. Every muscle, including my facial muscles, was in a lumpy knot. Pain was excruciating. I twisted into a fetal position. Awanza tried to help me, but when she touched me, the cramps worsened. I couldn't speak. I moaned and tears streamed from my eyes. Awanza began to weep. My muscles locked in knots and started to spasm. The next 20 minutes seemed like an eternity. I fell unconscious from pain and exhaustion. I awakened about 20 minutes later, tired and very thirsty. I got off the floor. Immediately, my feet and legs cramped. I fell to the floor. I asked her to get me some water fast. I guzzled a quart just before the cramps reached my hands. Again, I laid in a painfully twisted fetal position for 15 minutes and passed out. I awakened 20 minutes later, thirsty and having to urinate. Cautiously, I moved my hands and arms to see if movement would initiate cramps. My limbs felt foreign and detached, but I had no cramps. I carefully flexed my toes. The cycle of cramps started again. I'll call your mother, Awanza said, trembling. No, she'll put me in a hospital. I'll be dead within days. People die from mushroom poisoning because they dehydrate, and the poisons in the mushroom dissolve their livers. Please get me water quickly. I realized the slightest flex of any muscle from my toes to my crotch initiated cramps. I crawled on my belly using my arms to pull myself around the house. I urinated into a bottle while lying on the floor. I carefully, slowly hoisted myself onto a toilet to defecate, as if I were paralyzed from the waist down, after which I was exhausted. Breathing was exhausting. Unless I accidentally flexed my lower extremities or grasped either of my hands too tightly, the cycle was every hour. Like clockwork, every 20 minutes, conscious taking care of myself, 20 minutes in excruciating cramps, and 20 minutes unconscious. My liver was in constant pain, sometimes mildly, other times severely. By the 4th day, I consumed 6 pounds of raw and salted butter, 2 dozen bananas, 2 dozen raw eggs, and 8 gallons of water, yet I was 20 pounds lighter. Now I could move my lower half slowly without causing cramps. The cycle was once to every 4 hours. I went to the neighbor's yard and looked at the mushrooms. I found a cup-like lip 1.5 inches below the dirt surface. I wondered what caused these mushrooms to deform. I figured it was chemical fertilizer or weed killer. I had eaten the mushroom nicknamed Death Cap. Several books claimed that every person who ate a half thumb size of the amount had died. I ate 15 times that. One book stated death usually comes within 10 days and is welcomed. I thought I would get used to the pain, but I didn't. On the 10th day, the cramps diminished to as few as 4 a day. Now Awanza could touch me. She rubbed my feet often, gently and kindly for hours at a time. It was the only thing I enjoyed. The cramps continued for 10 weeks. I had come almost full circle to where I had been after my cancer therapies. Semi-invalid. I developed chronic fatigue syndrome again. If I walked 2 miles, it took me 2 weeks to recuperate. Many days, simple tasks like brushing my teeth took an act of God. I lost most of my pleasurable sensations. Before, I walked in the woods Before, when I walked in the woods, I had felt a connection to every living thing, like feelings one has for loved ones. It was comforting and invigorating. Before, I was moved by colors the way music evokes feelings. Now I felt nothing from colors of the woods. I was dead and in hell. Most everything smelled repulsive. Noise drove me crazy. I remembered a hyperactive mockingbird that hung around for weeks. It was all I could do to keep from buying a gun and shooting it. The sound of barking instantly drove me into panic and fury. I constantly forced myself to be kind and understanding, although I felt destructive and chaotic. I had to eat every 2 hours to keep a semblance of equilibrium, but I was never hungry. After being that way for over 3 years, I feared I might remain that way for life. I worked hard at being optimistic, but often I wanted to die. I experimented and learned that a little cooked starch in combination with raw fat and fresh fruit could control my rage and depression. This experience inspired me to ponder about how much violence is a result of ill health. I speculated that most is. Now, almost 6 years later, I am mostly happy again. I triumphed over death against all odds again. I healed without being crippled. Aajonus has had multiple near-death experiences where it took years to recover his health. Each time he learned new things about the diet. He had stomach, blood, bone, lymphatic cancer, and all sorts of surgeries and radiation. He recovered from that slowly after discovering raw meat. He ate the poisonous mushrooms and went back to hell. He eventually recovered from that. Then he had all sorts of accidents. Brakes in his car, damage, almost drowned in the lake. He was abducted in a hotel and forced vaccinated with 3 swine flu vaccines. Barely survived that. Food in his house poisoned. Files on his computer had viruses put on them that he was going to use in court. All sorts of attacks. And every time he always learned more. And even things like before he discovered the diet, he tried to drown himself in the bathtub, and he learned that the hot baths allowed him to sleep with his cancer. It took the weight off of his spine so that he could float and he could learn to sleep. So that saved his life because he was able to start sleeping when he had the cancers. Man bodybuilds on the Primal diet. When he came to me at 56 years old, he was on the diet for 2 years. He had been real skinny, really skinny. 6'3", 140 pounds, that skinny. After 2 years on the diet, he put on 35, 40 pounds. It's a pretty good weight, not what I wanted him to put on though. He came to me and said, I've been skinny all my life and I want to bodybuild. Can I bodybuild? I said 2 pounds of meat a day, 1 pound at a time with a whole lubrication formula with each meal. In about 3 months, he put 4 inches on his arms and 6 inches on his chest. He got accused of taking steroids by his gym. He said, no, I'm just eating eggs and butter and raw meat, and they didn't believe him. Drug abusive biker protected with fat. All of a sudden, during the 3rd year there, a guy comes in and looks like he's right out of a motorcycle gang. Drug abuse and everything. Skin was thick and hardened like he's been using drugs and alcohol for 25, 30 years. So I had a consult with him, and looking at his irises, I said, this isn't possible. Are you from this planet? Because his insides were so clean, but it's obvious he's done so much drugs. And he admitted he did drugs, cocaine, alcohol for 30 years. I said, it doesn't make any sense. You're only 35 pounds overweight. He says, before I was on the diet, I was 300 pounds. And even bad fat protects you. So this guy was super fat, but the fat protected him from the damage of the drugs. If he was skinny, he'd probably be extremely fucked. So the only reason his insides were healthy is because he had a lot of fat, even though it was bad fat. Teenage girl paralyzed from vaccines. She was a sophomore in high school, and they lost all her vaccine records, so they made her take all of them again. 10 days later, she was a vegetable with Guillain-Barré disease, which is total paralysis. She couldn't eat, and they had to feed her through a tube, and she was on oxygen. She came to me 3 years after the incident, and having her get over a small threshold in a wheelchair caused her massive pain, excruciating pain. Her voice was so soft that her mother had to put her ear up to her mouth and work hard to understand her. I couldn't understand a word. I gave her a half cup of my kefir while I was talking to her, kefir I made with my own spit. Of course, I wouldn't tell them that. She couldn't hold her head up. Her head was down, and she had her arms in the wheelchair. Her only movement was her lips and crying. I fed her through a straw. I blended up the kefir so it would be thinner. After a half cup, she smiled for the first time in 3 years. She actually felt a little bit good. She had a whole cup and a half before she left, and she's actually able to lift her head a little bit, just from a cup and a half of kefir. This kefir I made from my spit, not regular kefir from Amos. I didn't tell her that. She can only do the diet 50% because they live on Tigo Island. Her father works for making vaccines. I don't get it. He could find another position somewhere else. He's a smart man. Cats and dogs experiment. Cats and dogs frozen meat experiment. Go back to those tests I did with cats and dogs when I fed them organic frozen meat. I got a whole side, split it into a quarter, and took sections of each and put them in 2 different categories. I froze one category. I fed it to these animals for 6 weeks and some up to 10. After 6 weeks, the ones who ate it frozen had a skin disorder, plus they were drinking 2 to 3, 4 cups of water a day. The dogs that ate the fresh meat, even slightly stinky meat by the end, they rarely drank water and were in perfect health. Calm and happy. The other dogs were scratching, The cats were scratching and one even had mange from it. It showed me that frozen meat is toxic, so it's not a good thing to eat. I knew that the fresh butter would help remedy the condition. I gave the animals who ate the frozen meat half fresh butter and half frozen. The ones that ate the frozen butter took 5 times longer to heal, showing that it destroyed 80% of the nutrients or made them unutilizable or whatever the case was.